I know when we use the word authenticity, it now sounds cliche because everyone talks about
Everybody does it.
authenticity, but
Yeah.
they don't really, not everyone necessarily means
Mm.
authenticity.
Hmm.
And authenticity with a sprinkle of aspiration
Ooh.
drives loyalty.
Today, I'm joined by Hassan Al-Hindwan, an employer branding luminary who joins us from the sizzling heat of his home country in Dubai. Hassan is an employer brand architect, talent accelerator, and employee experience architect. He's built global employer brands for some of the biggest companies in the world in the fast-moving consumer goods space, entertainment, tech, and even big pharma. He's got some hot takes and jaw-dropping gems for you today, so let's jump right in. All right, so I am joined now by the man, the myth, and the legend, Hassan Al-Hindwan. Hassan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to call me a legend. So I truly appreciate that, John.
I'm just elevating the ego from the beginning. Let's just start and get you to 1,000 right here. Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us. And look, we're here to dig into all things employer brand. I mean, you've been in it, but I want the audience to get to know a bit of background about you. I mean, you've been in everything from fast moving consumer goods to entertainment to tech to big pharma. Give a little bit of background for the folks.
Absolutely. So I think I've been privileged, I must say, to have worked with many global brands across very exciting industries, really,
Yeah.
from logistics all the way to entertainment, all the way to big pharma, and then
Yeah.
also, of course, tech and engaging tech. So it's been really a fascinating journey, talking and working with people and for people. And I
Mhm.
usually like to see it as how do I help people reach their highest, truest version of themselves?
Mm.
And I was able to do that in multiple levels across people engagement, talent experience, and a couple of years in the very fascinating employer brand.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So I got to tell you, most of the practitioners of employer branding that I know didn't go to school for employer branding. So talk to me a little bit about the journey to employer brand. What got you there, and what when did you fall in love with employer branding?
Actually, it might sound cliche. I fell in love with the marriage of marketing and HR right from the start.
Oh my.
Because my
Oh.
first assignment, actually, believe you me, John,
Hmm.
was in the first job I ever had out of university. So it
Okay.
was a graduate program that had to be publicized to an early talent audience that had no clue what this huge global FMCG brand was about. And I
Okay.
was like, they were like, this is your assignment. You need to get the word out. And I'm like, okay. So how do I use this HR expertise with what I learned in marketing and cook that together? And there were a couple of, very cool ingredients, and we got the
Mhm.
word out. And then I was like, wow, this is magic. And then as the years went by, I was in a couple of HR business partnering talent roles, and I realized there's a common thing across all of these organizations, really.
Mhm.
A lot of these global brands have amazing people practices. They put a lot of effort in their talent ecosystem, let's call it,
Sure.
but they struggle to differentiate because there's very similar brands. I mean, we could say, why would someone join a Coca-Cola versus a Pepsi? Why would someone join a Visa versus a MasterCard? And that question was in my mind burning. And so
Sure.
what happened was, whenever there was an assignment or a challenge that said we need to be more well known, we need to attract specific talent, we need to keep specific talent, and there was an opportunity, I would raise my hands. But
Okay.
it was not easy. So long story short, I had to go on webinars, I had to connect with people, I had to hear podcasts like the podcast we're on at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was really learning by doing. And then I started to take some, courses to be certified because
Yeah.
I was obsessed. Let's put it this way. I really was obsessed. And I was like, my God, I have to learn more. So I went to take a course, actually 2 to 3 courses.
Yeah.
And then that is how I thought, okay, now I need to go and learn more about marketing. And then I learned about marketing. And I think the pin dropped when I was the HR business partner to the marketing VP in the entertainment company. And
Okay.
actually, I'm going to take a few minutes here, John, but
Please.
this is where it really turned the table. We were
Okay.
in a room and people were talking about a Justin Timberlake concert at that time,
Okay. Yeah.
and they were, the marketing team were like, we're not selling enough tickets. And they showed me a media plan and they were discussing between themselves. And I was the HR person there. I'm not
Sure.
going to, they thought I'm not going to advise them on their media plan. They're the marketing experts. And
Right.
then I started looking at the media plan and started saying, why don't you put more on social? Why don't you do some paid ads? Why don't you do some collaborations? And then the marketing VP she looked at me and she's like, are you sure you're in the right career, Hassan? Like, would you like a shift? And I still hadn't made my mind up there. But that is where I learned, what, marketing is very deep. There's a lot of, you really need to understand your audience. And actually, it's similar in HR. You have to understand the psychographics of the audience. So when I did 1+1=2, that is when I understood, okay, this is what my career path will be and should be. And that is where I ended. I ended up finally leading the global talent brand for Sanofi, having seen both parts of both HR and marketing.
Wow. Wow. What a whirlwind journey to discovery. And it's clearly non-linear, right? So it's not like you went
No,
straight from school and then boom, you're an employer brand. You were aware of opportunities to merge not only your passions and curiosities with a business need that was prevalent or present.
yeah.
That in itself, though, so give us a sense of time frame. So when is all of this happening where this these aha moments are happening and the opportunities are presenting themselves?
So actually, I would say the biggest opportunities were during the graduate program. That was a major aha moment. Yeah, right out
Okay.
of uni. The second opportunity was when I was an HR business partner
Uh-huh.
to marketing. This was 8 years back.
Okay. Yeah.
The third aha moment was during when I was doing talent development and people engagement for a
Okay.
logistics company, and they had to activate their EVP. And they wanted people, there was no dedicated resources. This was
Yep.
5 years back. So raised my hand, did that on top of my talent management and talent engagement hat. And then very recently, 2 years to 3 years back, leading it full time for Sanofi, globally, actually. So it
Got it.
went from local to regional to
To
global,
global. Yeah. Yeah. And
but it
so
was
we're going
never
all the way back.
dedicated. It was fully dedicated the last 3 years. It was always a part of a role.
Got it. So we're going back almost 10 years now, right?
Correct.
I mean, clearly, if
Yes.
Justin Timberlake was still performing, because I think now he just started performing again. But either way,
Yeah.
okay. So that's helping. So it's still an early. I mean, 10 years ago, employer brand in its contemporary, form today is more maybe let's say 15, maybe 20 years, right? So it's still not caught on yet. HR leaders, for the most part, at that point, don't really know what employer brand is. Some progressives know what employer value proposition is. So you're now
Visionary. Yes.
right. So you're literally at the ground floor in some of these organizations where you're having to not only showcase the solution, but also educate on what the solution even means. So how did you approach that? Because you see the opportunity. Hey, how do we raise awareness with X, Y, and Z talent pool? And then, but there's really no function for it, right? There's no role dedicated, no job description even. How do you build the case, educate, and get rolling into that work?
I think that's a very good question. Number one is really flexing your case to the audience in front of you. I
Mm.
learned that the hard way, but it has been very, very instrumental. For example, if you were to speak to the HR or the talent leader,
Mm-hmm.
you would need to talk in the language that they're talking,
Sure.
because I can bet you everyone now talks about HR transformation in some way or form. It's either
That's
they
right.
want to be more digital, it's either they want to be more focused, it's either they want to use AI. There's something happening around transformation
Yeah.
sitting on the chief people's officers or chief talent officers desk. So you
Sure.
need to figure out which is the most pressing agenda slash agendas and speak to that.
Okay.
Once you've got that initial buy-in or aha moments, like, oh, they can help us. For example, one of the ways I remember was there was a huge focus on diversity, and then I started showing this is how I can help specifically on bringing more diverse representation, because that was something key on not just the HR leaders desk, but also the executive team's desk. Yeah. The other thing was around internal mobility. And that is what people were struggling with, internal mobility. Something had to be done about internal mobility. They tried so many things. Or, what is something different? What can be done? So I did not go and talk about big things like activating the EVP and all of these very fancy, very needed things. But I tried to focus on the things that were on their table. And once I started getting initial traction, did
Sure.
I then say, okay, but this is the long-term thing that needs to be done. This is what I can help you short-term. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, organizations might be long-term focused, but they're also very quarter by quarter driven. So you need to show them that long-term ROI, but you also need to show them what can be done now in the next 3 to 6 months. So it's about really going 60,000 feet up and then going way down and, trying to roll your sleeves up, like they say, these corporate lingo, but that's the reality. Roll your sleeves and see what can be done now. Um, so yeah, that was, the one of the ways in which it could be done.
Yeah.
The
So,
other thing was around business leaders. Really, I think sometimes HR leaders believe it more when the business sees it as pressing, because
say
usually the HR leader is a business partner
more.
to
Right.
the business leader.
That's
So
right.
if you've got a business leader that is passionate about beating competition or productivity and efficiency, again, speak to their language. If their
Mm.
language is about efficiency or productivity or shareholder value or whatever it is that they're after, speak to that language. And if it lands, then that is where you will start getting support. And if you get the business leader's sponsorship, it just makes life much, much more easier.
I think you're tapping into something that most employer brand leaders deal with, that I think is super critical. And I want to make sure the audience really, really hears this. So, your leadership at the highest levels of HR, your CHRO, they have to partner with the executive leadership of their counterparts across the business. If they're not
100%.
speaking to the interest and the objectives of their stakeholders, i.e., the chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, whomever, then your brand work is going to get virtually ignored, right? Because the business won't see the value of why are you asking me to do X, Y, and Z, right? So I love that you said,
100%.
yeah, you've got to put their interests at the forefront and showcase then or work backwards into how will
Yeah.
employer brand actually help you support or achieve those objectives. That's
Yeah.
brilliant approach. It's good that you that you learned that early, and I'm
I
sure
learned
that
it the hard way, because I
say
remember
more.
being
Tell me
told, like,
more.
you know what, honestly, the
Yeah,
executive leader, there's some of the things they honestly don't care about. They've got so much on their plate.
that's
If you
right.
can save them money, if you can drive efficiency, if you can get something faster, they will listen. Other than that, it goes into the no priority list
That's right.
or less
Yeah.
priority list, let's say.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. So look, let's dig in a little bit into the tactics. Let's get into the weeds. So you're in this work. Typically the process is establish an employee value proposition. So let's start here, and this is more of uh, a, a, a this or that. Where do you land in this argument? So there's employee value proposition or employer value proposition. Which one do you land on typically?
To be honest, I see it as semantics.
Okay, same. Okay,
I see it as semantics because it's not a or,
okay,
it's both.
it's and.
Yeah, it's about the give and the get.
Yes.
Why would the employee care
Yep.
about what you offer, and what can you get out of the employee? So if it brings both the give and get together, then you've got a value proposition that is strong enough to land what you want, regardless of the objective that you have. So if you can show very clearly how you differentiate your give and get from both an employer and an employee standpoint, the value proposition is strong.
And quick shout out to the authors of the Give and Get approach to
100%.
employer brand. So yes, very good friends. So okay, love that. It's an and, not an or. So
Yeah.
so the EVP for you, talk to us a little bit about the approach, right? What are you looking to achieve? How are you achieving it? And what are some of the outcomes you look for as success of a solid and well-defined EVP?
Yeah. You see, number one, John, is one of the reasons I accepted to come onto your podcast because it said unfiltered. So
That's
I am
right.
going to share the unfiltered approach.
We want the raw and uncut, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
A is, I don't think the EVP is the most challenging thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah? As long as you have voices from external candidates, and when I mean external candidates, I mean people that may have rejected your offer, people who were silver candidates, people who are bronze candidates, people who are gold candidates, the people that have accepted your offer and are being onboarded. Like, you really need to talk about the journey. You really need to get people's voices through onboarding, through engagement, through going through career development, but also people who are detractors, honestly, to understand what is distracting you, and your leaders, of course. But one thing I found that is very powerful is when you truly co-create at the employee level. You truly understand what they're telling you. And the other part is, what journey are you on? Because the EVP cannot be purely aspirational, because otherwise your employee experience is not going to match that EVP. If it's too aspirational, you are not going to be selling the truth. Therefore, you need to understand where are you currently, what is your journey, your cultural journey, your employee experience journey, your business journey, and where you're going to, and then future. What is the type of talent you want?
Sure.
What do they look like? What are their personas? Now, once you get the current and the aspirational, and you're able to balance both in your EVP and make it simple and slick enough for different stakeholders to understand, that to me creates an EVP that is for all. Because otherwise, if it's stuck in the drawers of the comms or the people and culture department, and people cannot make sense of that EVP, it's very difficult to activate. That's why we reach a situation where EVPs are great, but then the activation becomes a problem.
Oh, we'll get there. Yes. So you mentioned stakeholders. So who are your stakeholders in the EVP build process? Who's most important? Who are the critical players in making sure that not only do you have access to what you need and who you need, but maybe even decision makers, supporters, and so forth?
Now, definitely you've got the functions. So in the functions, I would say, ensure your comms and marketing teams are involved from actually before the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
From
yes,
the
yes.
very, very beginning. You do not want to create an EVP that is siloed from the brand. Yeah,
Right.
that's going to land you in hot waters. You might have to restart your project from the start. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, like this is non-negotiable.
Uh-huh.
It's a non-negotiable. Then you definitely need to have your talent team and your recruitment team and your people and culture leaders, those who are engaged and those who want to be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly is having a sample of management. And by management, I mean middle management a sample, director level a sample, very senior leaders a sample,
Mm-hmm.
and then a sample of employees at the different stages of their journey, from
Okay.
onboarding to engagement to basically the levels, and also diversity of gender, diversity of thought. This is critical because if you have, especially if you're leading an EVP I'm talking about a global brand here. If
Mm-hmm.
you're leading an EVP for a global brand and you do not have diversity of perspectives, you're going to create an EVP that might just be suited for the global HQ, and everyone else is going to feel left out. And then, as we talked about, of course, the funnel starts with your candidates. So you need to have perspective from your candidates, the
So
people who you reached out to, who rejected your offer, who accepted your offer, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the stakeholders I would say are needed.
and that's
Of
a
course,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was just saying that there are a lot of stakeholders, but you can manage the discussions differently. With some,
Mm-hmm.
it can be less intensive, sending a survey or doing some short focus groups and having more people so that you can run through massive amounts of information and data. But then for your major stakeholders, like your marketing and comms, your talent, your business leaders, you need to run separate interventions because of course you cannot go and speak to 1,000 people at the same time. So there's different levels of effort versus the stakeholders you want to involve.
That's right. That's right. And to your point, I mean, it's a laundry list of players involved in this production, right? And so um, stakeholder management is crucial, and even the timing of that throughout this process and making sure people are well informed and also know when their part to lift is present as well. But speaking of that though, so in the ways that you've worked with an employer brand, have you been like all internal team, or was it combination of internal team and external agency partner, both just internal? What was your setup as far as doing the work?
It was very different in different organizations depending on the maturity of the employer brand journey.
Okay.
So they were organizations where it was a mix of internal and access to external creative agencies.
Hmm.
There was others where it was mostly internal and a couple of freelancers that you would work with. So it's really dependent on whether there was investment, the maturity, and where we are in the journey. But I think
Yeah.
I have been privileged in the very recent past to have access to a couple of agencies, I would say.
There you go. Okay, and we'll
Mhm.
reserve the best agency for last, but we'll leave that on the table on the side here. Uh, so with that stated, then, and this is something that that any employer brander worth their salt has faced this. The age old challenges between HR or employer brand and internal marketing and comms. Yes, I'm sorry if I'm bringing up traumatic experiences for you, Hassan. But this is something like if you are going to get into this space, you have to know that that is going to be something you're going to deal with. So I would love to hear not necessarily your trauma stories, but really your triumph stories. How have you found it best to engage, to partner, to collaborate with an internal marketing or an internal comms function, and all of that umbrellaed under the context that, you know, employer brand is relatively new as a function, and so these age old functions that have historically been the mouthpiece for a large organization externally are now having to share a sandbox, if you will, with a function that is relatively new, but is capturing the voice and the lived experience and the stories of every employee within the organization. and there's no playbook for how you're supposed to collaborate effectively. So I would love to hear how you've approached this very common challenge within your career.
it, let me
Honest.
start by saying it's hard work. I cannot put it any other way. It's
That's right.
very, very hard work.
Yeah.
But from a triumph perspective, the pin drops when you showcase to your stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean the people you work with very closely. You need to make marketing, branding, social media, whatever you call in your organization, your best friend. They are your best friend. They are your partner. And what I mean is, when you showcase a project, you go with the aim that this is how it's going to help your KPIs. So when you talk to a social media person, you can say, I am aware that, for example, after getting to know my social media team, I understood that they were very resource constrained, just like we were in employer branding. And I started to understand their real objectives and the constraints towards the objectives. And then I was like, okay, so your objective is to raise reach, your objective is to raise awareness, whatever the objective was. This is how we can help. We can get you content, we can do da 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 da. This is the support we need. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's also about, I would say, small triumphs in the beginning, because sometimes when, like you just said, John, when it's new, people are skeptical. Like, are you coming and to take my kingdom? Are you coming to take the crown? Like, what are you coming to do? So you
That's
need to show small triumphs and
yeah.
allow them to shine at times. Allow them to
Mm.
shine at times.
Mm.
So if there
Mm.
is, for example, I think for me,
Yeah.
the
Give me an
triumph
example.
was
Okay.
two of our campaigns had actually reached the highest engagement rate versus any other campaign that was happening in the organization. And this was a true aha moment for them. And they started sharing it everywhere to say, this is the numbers, da 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 da. And then I'm like, okay, so do you see how it is? Do you see how good it is? Did you have a taste of it? So now do you want more? And they're like, yeah, how can we help you? So it changed from, oh my God, another piece of content on already a crammed content calendar, to
Sure.
how can I help you? For
That's right.
me, that was the turning point. It started to become a partnership, but that took time and conversations and alignment and a lot of dinners and a lot of lunches, but we got there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, you were hitting all of the points, and it's funny. I was just having this conversation with another, employer brand leader, and that very point about if we're on shared channels, which a lot of us are, especially if we're talking LinkedIn, well then it's easy to go to prove the case because all you have to do is go through like the last 10 posts of corporate brand content and then the last X amount of posts that you're that you have. In their case, it was only like one post that they've been able to get up this year alone, right? In the first 6 months. But even that one post had more engagement than all of the prior 10 posts of corporate content combined. And so
100%.
it right, so the case is proven right there in your own data that hey, people like to engage with people content, not necessarily company or corporate. I know, and
Exactly.
that's not a value judgment on corporate content, but the case in point is that social is for community building, right?
Yeah.
And if you're only one way communicating about you, then in any conversation that gets boring very quickly. So you have to be dynamic, and employer brand offers our corporate communications partners that dynamic approach now of adding the other facets of the brand. So I love that you shared that triumph there. So let's get back.
100%.
Yeah, so let's get back to it. EVP. You've got the EVP. You've gotten the approval. Everybody signed off. Yes, this is who we are as a culture. This is our give and our get. Our right. Now it's time to build the aesthetic, the messaging, the narratives, and the visuals that go along with that. Take me through your process in sort of transitioning from theoretical of EVP and here's who we are, but now getting an application and this is what it looks and feels like.
Very good. I think what we saw and actually when I was leading the global talent brand,
Uh-huh.
is actually asking the stakeholders what is critical for the next 1 to 2 years from an application perspective. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
do they need? What are they really missing? And collecting this information into a kind of a kit of different requests, and then figuring out the activation mode. So, for example, we then mapped it into, this is what the recruiters need, or this is what TA needs. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is
Yep.
what our business leaders need. Some were, very aspirational. You couldn't do it immediately, but some were really needed, and some were, like, you can do something with it.
Sure.
And to give practical examples, for example, the business leaders were like, we're struggling to find specific talent pools. We are struggling to keep those talent pools, and this is what I need to really, accelerate XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
And then Z was, the people and culture team to say, what is it that you need? What are the small things? What are the big things? And mapped out to, impact versus effort versus the needs. And then that determined the application for the next 1 to 2 years. Yeah?
Okay.
And what we figured out and what we landed is, of course, A, is the narrative was going to be built using the brand, let's say, journey, because the brand was going from, let's say, a much more traditional brand to a much more modern, slick, simple brand architecture. So we had to match that from an employer branding perspective. Yeah, again, you need to be friends with your brand and marketing teams. So we then ensure that from a visual and from a narrative perspective, that we're speaking the same language. The tone of voice had to match what they were after. And I think we were lucky enough because the tone of voice was actually what we wanted. It was human, it was simple, it was differentiated. And this is what we want from an EVP, and this is what we want from an EVP activation. And then what we did after the tone of voice was signed off, then the visual aesthetic or the visual brand architecture had to be signed off. And this is where we took, of course, the EVP tagline, if you like, and then the EVP info and all of that stuff to inform the output. And what was clear is we had to cut through the attention noise that is on all of the digital platforms. And to cut through the attention noise, it had to stand out through its simplicity. The images were going to take front, and then the content and the text is going to tell the story. So once that was signed off, it then came to actually working with the creative teams, freelancers, etc., to now say, okay, you need to do this for the recruiters, that this is their toolkit for the campaigns. How does that translate into campaigns? What does this mean for advocacy? All of the things that one has to think of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, it's no small feat. Like I think sometimes conceptually when, let's say an executive leader says, well, we need an employer brand, and there's not really a clear articulation or understanding on their point of how massive that feat is, right? Because of all of the players that have to come together, not only to understand at a foundational level of who we are, but then articulating that visually in a way that not only, to your point, gels with the existing corporate brand, because it can never be disjointed, disconnected, or competitive with. It always has to complement and gel, right? And then, right now we're at the point of, okay, we've built the thing, but now we've got to tell the world about it. And oh, by the way, we have to start at home. So transition me through now. Okay, brand is built, EVP Foundation helped build the brand. Now you've got to activate, right? And I think this is the thing that so many of us as practitioners, this is where we either fly or fail, right? Because the build is one thing, having the brand and the aesthetic and the messaging and so forth, that's cool too. But if nobody ever hears about it, If nobody at the leadership level can point to it and say, I know what the employer brand is, or if middle manager or hiring manager doesn't know the talking points, right? Then did any of it matter? So how do you now bring your organization through from build to activation, right? From research to reality, as we call it. What are your like priorities first and foremost to getting the brand launched?
So I think, again, it depends on the journey one is in and the maturity of the journey one is in. So when it was the beginning of the activation, right at the beginning, we had to make decisions on what is the right intervention to get an employer brand out. And a decision was reached, it has to be inside out. It has to be inside out. Because if people inside do not understand your EVP and your employer brand, then how do you expect people outside to relate and affiliate with your employer brand?
Say it again for the people in the back, Hassan. Say it again.
So I truly and fully believe this is the way to go when
Yeah.
activating your brand. And it's about starting simple. So what we wanted to do now, and we had a lot of people, especially in different, let's say HR and business leaders come and say, okay, I get the EVP. Actually, they don't get the EVP fully, but they get what they get.
They think they
So
get it,
what
but
does this mean? What does
yeah,
this mean for me? What
sure.
does this mean for my team?
Right.
What does it mean to me as a business leader? What does it mean to me as a people and culture leader? What does it mean to me as a middle manager? Why
Yeah.
should I care
Right.
about all of this?
Mm-hmm.
So what we did is we said, okay, number one, the organization I was part of was not a marketing organization. So you
Okay.
have to show outputs for them to believe the narrative. So what we did is I said, okay, every EVP pillar needs to be translated into stories and proof points that are aligned to the pillar. The
Mm-hmm.
only way we will get hooked and a hook with people is when they see stories. Yeah, because stories, I think they just connect everyone. So what we did is we pulled out stories from every single EVP pillar. We didn't put the whole text of the entire pillar because honestly, no one cares when they're not in the teams that manage this. And we said, okay, let's listen to a story about so and so and how they went through resilience and how they changed stuff and what did they do for science or for tech or whatever it is. And everyone's there in the town hall looking at and like I could see some people getting emotional and saying, wow, I feel so proud to be part of this organization. So we did something small and said, okay, how do you feel now? And a couple of other questions. And after people shared their thoughts, we moved it back and said, this is what the employer brand and the EVP is for. It's to build engagement, it's to build loyalty, it's to get other people to feel connected, and it's to get a sense of community and
Mm.
purpose. And from there, I think it started becoming a bit more easier to dispel. From there is where we started going and talking about, okay, now let's start with advocacy. Advocacy was a huge way to activate the brand internal to external. And it was one of the biggest activation, I would say, agendas that we had was advocacy, and then the other things like career site and all of the platforms that one has to manage in employer brand.
That's right. Wow, that's so powerful, it really resonates because I think that first win is when employees get to see their colleagues being, or even themselves being featured for who they are, not just the work they do, right? And I think that that's so important because that's how you're going to get people to sort of like, on the sidelines say, "Oh, I can talk about that. There's an outlet for that. We have permission to do that. Oh, sign me up,
Yes.
right? And now you just did the greatest promotional campaign for your ambassadorship program with that one video spotlight. So talk to me about, and this is perfect. So that presentation of the video, what method did you go with? Was it sort of like a town hall? Was it just e-blast, everybody check the video out? Like, how did you sort of unveil or premiere the videos, or whatever the employer brand launch was?
I like to ensure that whatever content is produced, where possible, to use all sensory experiences that one
Oh,
can possibly get to.
yeah,
Yeah.
say more.
So
Yeah.
I ensured that it was sent through digital platforms. I ensured that it was sent on global town halls. I ensured that it was in high traffic places. So we
Mhm.
worked it out with the comms teams across the globe to say, which are your high traffic areas? Can you please ensure that this is played in your high traffic areas, in your town halls? So there was different content formats, and then we sliced and diced the video to
Mhm.
play in different formats for different, um, let's say,
Yeah. Different
platforms
platforms. Sure.
to ensure that it went everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For example, our salespeople use iPads. How is it going to play on an iPad? Our people in the offices, usually during breaks, they see it in the corridor. Can we
Mhm.
ensure that during the break time you play it in the corridor? And then so it's about the moments of experience
Ooh.
to ensuring that it is to expand reach, honestly, just like you would use on social media.
That's right. Oh wow, that's a brilliant approach. And I think there's so much art and science to that successful
100%.
launch, right? Because you're not going to be all things to all people at all times, as best as we try, right? But I
Yes.
think capturing and being very aware of where those moments where people are congregating in certain areas, where people are going to be on their iPads or on breaks to
Yes.
time your content accordingly. That's so
Yes.
smart. So smart. That's fantastic. So boom. So I mean, we've now gone through the journey. It's out there. It's in the wild. So now your external strategy, and I think this. I would love to get your perspective on this, because the immediate thought is that employer brand is for talent attraction, right? And yes, that's true in part, but it's also for engagement and retention, right? So the attraction piece. We'll start there, and then we'll get to engagement and retention. But the attraction piece. So yes, social, yes, career site, obviously driving traffic back to the apply process. But what else what else do you employ to make sure that the brand messaging is getting out there and the awareness is being driven of all of the great things that are available to prospective talent?
I think this is a super important topic, honestly, John, because um, I always hear that, okay, this is about TA and this is about talent attraction. And
Right.
I'm like, yes, it is, but it's only a part of. Now, instead of having to go and convince a million stakeholders,
Hmm.
what I did was utilize the main strategic priorities that the talent team is after.
Okay.
So I knew that internally, one of the main priorities was internal mobility and career development. They wanted to enhance that. The second one was on early talent.
Yeah.
So if we took internal mobility, the people and culture team were very proud of their career development month initiative that was going across the organization. However, they were challenged, which I think is very common in a lot of organizations, to get their people to write their development plans, because a lot of people question development plans. I mean, you need a whole webinar for that. But a lot of people are like, should I even write it? Am I going to go anywhere? I don't think so. It's just going to
Right.
be parked in the drawer, so people don't do it. And
Hmm.
then B, there was reluctance and worry amongst people when it comes to applying for roles they do not necessarily have experience in.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these two things had to be shifted
Hmm.
in the career development month. So HR was talking about how to do it.
Hmm.
And this is where I said, okay, I have a couple of suggestions to really shift the narrative here. Let's change. You want to change mindset? Let me help you change mindset. And
Okay.
we started using the power of advocacy because the concept of advocacy was new. People were not fully sure, does this really help, So I was like, okay, how about we start sharing, getting our own people to share the power of their career development, their internal mobility stories, but let us get them to talk authentically, please. Let them talk about their imposter syndromes. Let them talk about their worries. Let them talk about their triumphs. Let them talk about trials and tribulations. Let them be themselves. And let's use these stories, and then we do a campaign around it from different perspectives: webinars, town halls, video, digital, Yammer, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
And of course, initially they were like, oh, okay, but do we really need a campaign to do something? Normal, regular pushback. But in the end, they said, okay, why not? Let's do it. So we did it. And in that year, in comparison to the year before, the number of people after Career Development Month that went to put in their development plan increased 46% versus the year before.
Whoa.
The number of people that applied to a gig or a development assignment increased 36% compared to the year before.
Oh my gosh.
And I was able to then, share the data when the data was shared and say, okay, now do you believe in the power of advocacy? Do you see how powerful it is? Should we do more of this? Yeah. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to start to what is a pain point on your chief talent officer or chief people's officer's desk.
Oh my gosh, that's powerful. Those numbers don't lie, right? Like you don't even have to make a case after that. It's just like,
Exactly.
Would you like more? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So then that's the attraction, engagement, and retention. And I want to just take a beat on this because a lot of times especially today, organizations are looking to increase representation of you name diverse community here. They're looking to reduce or mitigate attrition in those same communities as well, right? So it's equal parts. Yes, we need to bring more in, but we also need to make up for those that we're losing. But then also take identity out of it and just look at the attrition rate going on, right? And so now we're looking at attrition rates and how do we leverage employer brand to get people to stay? All right. What are your thoughts there in terms of not only the attrition, right, and retention, but also ensuring that culture of various communities is spotlighted in an authentic, non-performative way to encourage the reduction of attrition? What are your thoughts?
I think this is where I know when we use the word authenticity, it now sounds cliche because everyone talks about
Everybody does it,
authenticity,
yeah.
but they don't really, not everyone necessarily means authenticity. And authenticity with a sprinkle of aspiration drives loyalty. Yeah.
Put that on a t-shirt, right?
So number one is, I
Authenticity
think,
with a sprinkle of aspiration. Authenticity with a sprinkle of aspiration. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
100%. So if I go back to your point, John, let's say we talk about representation. Yeah. If you go, and I've seen this happen in many organizations, let's assume you have a much lesser representation of Black females in your organization.
Okay.
But you go and showcase one story of a successful Black female and you blast it all over social media. People assume that you have huge representations of successful Black females in your organizations that have been given equal access to opportunities.
That's the
If
assumption.
you do not have that in your organization, you are not selling the truth. And that is going to start increasing attrition within the organization. I know there's many reasons of attrition. I'm talking about an example. So if you've got a very, very serious intention to increase Black female representation, then share the authenticity that this is where we are, this is where we want to go, we need your help, but here are some examples of how it's already working. And to do that, this is where employer branding now and engagement comes together. You will need to co-create this with Black females in your organization. And say, what is needed? What should we do more? The focus groups, DEI, all of this will come into play. And then you shape the narrative and go externally and talk about, I'm assuming internally it's already being done. Then that's what I'm saying externally. To say, okay, this is where we are. This is where we're heading. This is our career. This is the story. And now come in and let's co-create this story together. Now you're showcasing that it's not perfect.
That's right.
But if you paint a picture that is perfect, you're misleading people.
Man, I promise folks, we did not have a pregame conversation about our approach to inclusive ethos and how we market and sell at Shaker Recruitment Marketing, the inclusive approach to employer brand. You are hearing it completely independent because Hassan is a professional employer brand practitioner. You cannot build performative employer brand expressions and sell false narratives. It only drives up attrition rates.
Yes.
Don't do that. Right. I love that. That is gold. And I think I think intuitively we know that, but then there's the pressures from the organization. And look, the reality is, how many of these organizations are willing to be that transparent about their flaws? Right. And that is the untapped fertile ground that we as employer branding professionals need to explore in the next evolution of this work. Because to your earlier point, everybody's using authenticity. Not everybody's being transparent.
Yes.
I'm off my soapbox. So I know we only have a few minutes left of your time, and I want to be conscious of that. We've taken our listeners through a journey, and it would be incomplete if we didn't talk about how do we measure the impact and success of employer brand, not recruitment marketing, but employer branding, because there's a distinction. I would love for you to talk about that distinction in measurements of success for this work.
I think it's just like in any function where they have long-term metrics and short-term metrics. Your employer brand is usually the long-term metrics. Your recruitment marketing is usually the short-term metrics.
That's right.
So if the journey, in this case, let's say it was about ability to position the organization more strongly versus its competitors, then there had to be a competitive benchmarking of our employer brand versus our competitor employer brand. And in this case, we needed external support and external benchmarking of our entire employee experience end to end from a social listening perspective. Yeah, a social listening perspective. They say was, for example, where are we on diversity and inclusion? What are people saying about career development? What are people saying about well-being? And then having a very transparent conversation with internal stakeholders to say, this is our strong proof points, and this is our, let's say, proof points where we need to improve. And this is where it gets a bit worrying, John, because usually your people and culture leaders want to buck the trend. For example, everyone is talking about well-being. So let us talk about well-being. We've just launched an EAP. We have just launched X Leave. Let us blast it out. But I'm like, okay, if we review the social listening metrics, it's not telling us that we're doing very well on well-being. It's telling us that we're doing well on career development. Unless you're very comfortable to go and talk about your journey to well-being, it's fine. But if you want to say that you're great at well-being, that's not what the data says. So
Mm.
this is where your measurement becomes powerful, is when you have competitive benchmarking to your data. For example, in this case, it was awareness of our value proposition versus our competition.
Yeah.
Aligned to the strategy. The strategy was about increasing internal mobility, increasing diverse representation, enhancing engagement and well-being of people. So that is, we used the same metrics and spoke to the people in culture and business leaders around those metrics. That was one. Number two, it's about, for example, metrics of not just candidates. Yes, you talk candidate satisfaction, you talk about time to hire, you talk about all of those things, but you even need to show cost metrics. Yeah. Once you activated your EVP into an employer brand and actually activated it externally, at the end of the year, keeping everything the same, did you realize any reduction in agency costs? Did you realize any reduction in paid media, if you're using advocacy, for example? Do you need to show how much money was saved or how much resources you would have evaded because of your employer brand? But the measurement, in my opinion, always needs to be linked to the journey and the space of the journey you are in. If you've just started your employer brand, I mean, you cannot say, I want to reduce payroll costs by 10%. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You need to start talking about reach and awareness. But if you're 5 years into activating your employer brand, then hell yes. Otherwise, your CFO will be like, why am I putting money into employer brand? Then you need to start showcasing hardcore financial return on investment.
There you have it, folks. An absolute masterclass in employer brand strategy into the mind of a formidable practitioner in employer brand. Hassan, we are coming up on our time. Is there anything you want to share in parting with our audience around employer brand, on anything we talked about, or maybe something we missed?
I just wanted to share that I understand sometimes the pain that an employer branding practitioner goes through, especially if they're a 1 or 2 or 3 person team for a 10,000, 20,000 plus organization. The resources are very constrained. So you don't need to say yes to everything, is the first point. Yeah. The second point is really understand what your senior executives want and talk to their language. Do not talk EVP lingo. Do not talk employer branding lingo. Talk their language and then infuse your EVP or employer branding language into it. Thirdly is start showcasing small triumphs. I know sometimes I myself get roped into that. I get so passionate and I'm like, yeah, but I want everything to look beautiful and perfect and amazing. But start small. Because especially when you have nothing, if you showcase one thing very well done, it is bound to just get much more and more traction. And it's about the power of influence and the power of community that will get you much, much further. And I know I've said this in the podcast, but I'm going to repeat it again.
Please.
The crown of employee branding is to be shared. You cannot wear the crown alone. And allow people to wear the crown at times. It's the only way you can move together forward. It's not a competition, it's a partnership.
Oof, man. I hope that everybody listening has garnered as much value as I have in our time together. Hassan, I want to thank you so much for coming on and having an unfiltered conversation about employer branding. This has been tremendous.
Thank you very much, John. I really, really, truly enjoyed this. And I look forward to many more episodes to come. And you have been a fantastic host.
Greatly appreciate it. Hassan, take care, be well, be safe out there. And hey, maybe we'll catch up in Amsterdam for World Employer Branding Day this year. You never know. Yeah.
Hopefully, I really look forward to that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, take care.